top of the container it's in, or in this case, maybe even from the screen, go down 25 pixels. And from the left side, go ahead and shoot across 50 pixels. And if we choose a z-index of 0, which is what it is by default, we're just saying, OK, and if anything happens to have a higher z-index, then the first one would be in the background. Now, the second one says position relative. A very subtle change here, but it could be very desirable to put something in a relative position. Typically, a reason why you would do that is you don't want, you actually kind of want to preserve where it was supposed to be in the original markup, and from that point, you want to start to move over, let's say 25px or 50px, not necessarily from the absolute, top or left side, but relative to where it would have been, if that makes any sense. And then the z-index property here at 1 would mean that it would float over things potentially if it was moved across other content, and if it was at the default of z-index 0, well, then it would maintain that positioning. So this isn't, of course, all of the options with regard to position, but it's two that if you use wisely, then you could use them effectively to accomplish exact placement of things. I say use wisely because with layouts in Windows 8, there's a chance that our layouts can change. We were talking about how devices and things like that well, we could switch something around to a portrait view, or there's even other features that we'll learn about tomorrow where we can position things off and dock it to the side. So you got to be careful using absolute positioning because of that, because layouts can change, and you may have an undesired effect if you use these without some caution. So I'll just put that little red flag out there. So the other thing that you can do is use display. In the example that is now on the screen, the dot vanish, which would mean anything that has a class that equals that. If you say display equals none, well, then that means it's gone. It did vanish, as the name implies. And then to show another way that you can use the display, I found that even on the web, there are so many forums and so many things regarding how do I exactly center content within, let's say, a box. So again, this is under the context of our, we're in legacy or traditional mode, right? Because hint, hint, Jeremy's going to be talking about a cool way to do this using another methodology. But this would be a traditional or legacy approach to saying, okay, well, let me use this table cell as a display. And because of that, it enables something very important. And that is, a lot of us have probably used text align, which means let's go ahead and center the text. But that does that centering horizontally. But when you try to use a vertical align, it really doesn't take effect unless you're in a display that supports it, such as table cell. So many web developers have tried to use that vertical align on a div without changing that display, and wondered, well, what's the point of that thing? It doesn't seem to work.
Isn't vertical align supposed to vertically align?
Exactly. So and now, if you set your display, because we know that tables have that vertical alignment, so it now supports it when you say, hey, I want my table cell to have that vertical align. Now, another important thing about getting it centered just right is you talked about in the previous module how you can apply these minimum heights and minimum widths. So you want to do that as well if you're going to use this little technique to center content, because if you don't do that, it's not going to take effect. It has to know what's my dimensions for sure, so I know how to center the content on the screen. Content could be something as simple as just text, whatever the case is in a box. So now I would like to demonstrate some of these layout features. And to do so, I'm going to switch over to a project that was open before, and now it's going to have some additions to it. So the first thing that I would like to do is look at this text. In fact, I'm going to go full screen and really make sure that we can see that. We have an SVG element that's been applied to this particular HTML. This is kind of a play off of what we did earlier. You can see down below here with the form that, this is where we had the kind of quiet clapping at that time. Finally got that fixed. But anyway, we have the SVG option here. And this is what it's going to do. Let me go ahead and run this first so we can see what it's going to do, and then we're going to see how we used all these legacy positioning techniques in order to make it work. So I'll run this, and what we have over here is, it looks like an image of, well, I don't know, what kind of phone does that kind of look like to you?
It's not, it looks a little bit like a black, no, I think it's a Windows phone.
It's a Windows phone. So I applied the SVG as recs that go on top of a container that has its background image set to a Windows phone.
So you're compositing or combining SVG with a regular old image. You're overlaying it.
That's correct. Now, that overlaying that you're referring to means I'm using these positioning techniques to put that SVG right on top of that item, so it has that effect that they're all combined.
I see.
I even have a hover in here. So remember, we talked about shadowing in the last one. So I can shadow, provide that glow around the entire thing once it's highlighted. And every time I hover over one of these little SVG recs, all I'm doing is setting that opacity that you were talking about earlier to something that would allow me to see through the solid color and see what was the, oh boy, shameless plug for myself there, but all the images and stuff that are underneath. So kind of, it could be used to actually create like a little menu that you want to have appear. And of course, with certain animations and things, we can have that thing slide in and slide out. But now I want to go back over to the code and discuss how did we make that possible so all this overlaying works. So that would all be in the CSS. And there is an options menu. You'll notice that I set its z-index position to a 2. I set its position to absolute. Set your top and left properties. And this is where I set that Windows 7 phone GIF. So, you know, I don't want it repeating or anything, but let's go ahead and set that as the background image. Then I have an options SVG. I set that relative. And I have to do an offset here just based on some of the default marginings and paddings and so forth. I have an options text in there. That refers to a little green text that was appearing at the top of the phone. And then if I hover over the SVG, then I get that box shadow effect. If I hover over any of the rects, I get the fill and the fill opacity features here. In this case, I chose, hey, fill it with a white color, but you know, with that kind of opacity, you never even knew that there was a white color. You know, it just became somewhat invisible. And that was basically how we were able to get this stuff positioned onto the screen. And it's also worthy to note that, you know, you could bring in your other CSS3 properties here, like changing the pointer or something, so it has that clickable effect. So I'm going to go back over now to our presentation, and I think that this is an opportunity to provide this little segue, because you and I have had some chats about, you know, how things have been done, and we're now also interested in seeing what are some other cool ways of doing things. You know, that centered box using that table cell, it kind of feels like a hack, because you're thinking, is it really a table cell? You know, I'm kind of using that even though it's not inside of some table, or it could have been, but in that case it wasn't. It works, but it feels like we need to have a way to within our application, since, as you said, everything seems to be a box, and a lot of things you're going to want to have that control over the centering or what we're going to be doing. There's some new things out there that I think that we should be aware of. So at this point in the agenda, we're getting into 2 of those, and the first one here is Flexbox.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, like I said before, just because it compiles and passes the unit tests doesn't mean that it's well-written code. I think one of the big parts of well-written code is code that another developer can step in and understand what's going on relatively quickly. And if I have to try to translate and map table cell, oh, it's not actually a table cell, but that's just a trick to make it center correctly, then that's not going to be ideal. So we're talking about the difference between how you lay out code, say, between 2002 and 2012. So we've got some implements here that were introduced to us in CSS3 that are super, super exciting. There's a lot of buzz about these online because they are not just something that Microsoft is doing, but they're something that W3C is, their submissions to W3C, and they're recognized as standards in W3C. And other browsers are recognizing the need for these and working on implementations as well. So we know that they're solving real problems. We know that they're alleviating real pains with developers, and so they're definitely worth looking at. The 2 that I'm going to highlight right now are the Flexbox and the Grid. And the reason why I'm going to highlight these two is because these are pure CSS. But we're going to look at some more layout techniques that you'll use specifically for making Windows 8 applications when we get into the, tomorrow's session, when we get into more Windows 8 specific stuff. But what we're talking about now is just CSS. So this is going to work on the web. Okay. Now, since the standards aren't entirely complete in W3C, we still have vendor-specific prefixes. So you're going to see this -ms prefix before some of the things that we do here. And that just means that it's not entirely solidified yet. But as soon as it is, Microsoft is committed to using the standard selector values instead of the vendor-specific values.
That's good.
So let's look at the Flexbox first. What problem is this solving? The Flexbox is giving us control over its child elements. Now, if you've got the Code Show project running, you can follow along. I'm just going to switch over to Code Show, and I'm going to go back up to the index and look for the Flexbox example. Now, some of these examples, if you've got a touchscreen monitor, you can swipe, or if you've just got a mouse wheel, you can scroll. But again, welcome to 2012. More of us are getting touchscreen monitors, and we can just swipe from one example to the next. But I'm showing a few of the advantages of using a Flexbox here. Now, one of the huge advantages of a Flexbox is the fact that when you're laying out its child items, you can do so horizontally or vertically. And in fact, when you're horizontal, you can go from left to right or from right to left. And same with vertical, top to bottom or bottom to top. So they're really flexible as far as that's concerned. Perhaps that's where they got their name. This first example is showing you 3 child items inside of a Flexbox. The Flexbox is that gray outline that you see. And its child items are red, green, and blue. Just simple divs that have some size so we can actually see them. Now, let's go look at the code for this. And that's going to be found in the Flexbox project. There's an HTML, CSS, and we're not really using any JavaScript in this at all. So first I'm going to go to the HTML. I'm going to close down my other ones so we're not confused. And let's look at this first example. This is it right here. It's very simple. We have a div with an ID of Flexbox1, and it has 3 divs below it. So you can see the role of HTML here. It's just the structure, a Flexbox, and then 3 things underneath it. Just the structure. The rest of this is happening in the CSS. So let's go to flexbox.css, and you can see that these are organized in sections because remember this example has multiple sections in it. And the first section has this CSS. The first thing I want to bring to your attention is this use of namespacing. Notice that all of my CSS style attributes, style rules, begin with .flexbox.
Now, did you say the word namespacing? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, namespacing in CSS is an interesting concept, right? So the namespacing that I'm talking about is the fact that we're working in a project. Let's go back to selector. We're working in a project that although what we're looking at now is the Flexbox, it is actually still inside of default.html. We're still inside that first page. We're implementing a single page application here.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So let me see. Let me get my bearings straight on this. What we're saying is that we've only been in one page, even though there's all sorts of pages in Code Show.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And each of those pages is dynamically swapped out into a content host because Code Show is based on the navigation app template. And so those pages are dynamically loaded.
So when those pages are dynamically loaded and they have their associated CSS style rules with them, I think I'm starting to see what you're saying why we need namespacing because
if we don't have a namespace on one of our CSS style rules, it's going to stick and it's going to affect the other pages.
And that may be exactly what you don't want to have happen. So unless you want it shared across the entire app, right, you probably do want it to be separated.
Yeah.
So show us that code again. That was interesting.
Yeah, actually on the HTML itself, you can see something interesting going on here. This page was created from the page control template, item template in Visual Studio. And so it automatically, you don't have to write this, but you automatically get these classes decorating this div that contains all of your code. So all of the pages have this fragment, and then this page specifically, since I called it Flexbox, has another class of Flexbox.
I see.
So that means that in my CSS, if I start my CSS style rule with the selector, with a class selector of Flexbox, then all of this rule is only ever going to define what's inside of this div. It will not pollute anything else. So that's important to note. We will, however, get way more in depth in the navigation app
Sure.
template tomorrow, and you'll